Hey, everybody. First of all, I just want to apologize how quickly we had to abruptly end the last session. We both got so involved in the conversation that we ended up not really looking at the time. And at the last minute, with about 30 seconds to go, I was like, oh no, we need to wrap this up because we're on free Zoom. So that means we have a 40-minute limit. What I want to do tonight is continue where we were last night. So what we were talking about before we were interrupted by the time constraints, um, Rick was talking to us about how AI might impact liberty or personal autonomy. And he was in the middle of talking about AI's ability in the future to manipulate history as it happens and change that narrative, change the information that we're receiving on a particular event, and thus be able to, both on a macro and a micro level, a societal level and an individual level, really persuade and affect the way we think about things. It's going to be much harder for us to differentiate what is true and what is false. So, Rick, when you were right as I cut you off,
Mhm.
you said that going back some years, some people were annoyed by some of the things that you did online, and then you mentioned a TV show, and I said,
Yeah,
"Cut."
yeah.
So keep
So,
going.
so what that was all about was basically, I get hypersensitive to things that are truthful versus not truthful, and specifically people passing off things that are untrue as true. Um, and there was a there's a huge trend, and I think it seems to be waning now, but it still goes on, where people would do these like hidden camera stunts, right?
Oh yeah.
And they would supposedly hide a camera somewhere and do a trick on somebody, and then they would have a reaction, and we all laugh. And that goes back to the show Candid Camera,
Yeah.
Alan
Yeah.
Alan Fuentes. And my understanding of the Alan Funt original Candid Camera show, it was very very legitimate. They actually hid the camera, and they might have to work on one trick like for 2 days until they finally got somebody with a good reaction and that kind of thing. But to get money and to get views, people just rush it because it does take patience to do something like that. So there, a lot, 95+% of the hidden camera tricks out there are fake. And
Well,
um,
unless you're really naive, it it should be pretty obvious because they just don't ring true. You
yeah,
know.
and so and even so, here's the interesting thing: even when people realize it's fake, they still laugh and say that's hysterical.
Mm,
But they're missing the whole point. The
yeah.
reason it's funny is because you got a reaction from somebody that was unsuspecting. That's the whole reason for the humor. If
Right.
they're just acting it out, it's not funny. It's different than a movie or a television show where they're acting it out and it's funny, because the whole point there is you are going into it with a suspension of disbelief.
Mhm.
I'm going to willingly suspend my disbelief, watch this movie. If I find something funny, I'll laugh at it. But it's usually not stuff like "boo," that was
Right.
funny.
Right.
That's not the kind of humor you find in movies, and there's a reason for that. And so it sounds kind of petty, but when you take that and you take the fake news articles, and you take this and you take that, and it all adds up. We're conditioning ourselves over time to accept things that aren't true as truth. And I see a problem with that philosophically, but also it conditions our minds in a way where we're not prepared for this future that's coming.
Well,
As we mentioned, go ahead,
yeah.
please.
You know what's really interesting about that? Back during the Cold War, and even still, probably not quite as overtly, but still in communist China and North Korea, certainly. Um, we often heard propaganda that was being disseminated into the population. And to the outsider, it seemed so obviously a lie. It seemed so obviously fake. And I thought for years, I grew up during the Cold War. I thought for years, like, how can they believe that? Like, how can they really believe that? And I forget where I heard this, but it was somebody who was well versed in the way communism worked and the way those kind of totalitarian societies worked is that they didn't expect the people to believe it, but it was almost it was almost a dehumanizing mechanism because, okay, we're telling you this, you know it's a lie. I know it's a lie. I know that you know it's a lie.
Right.
Yet you can do nothing about it, and you must accept and act to yourself and everyone else like it's the truth. And so it creates in people a real crisis of humanity. And
I love that word. Yes, you're right.
I I I
Yeah,
think that in many ways that's sort of what we're really doing to ourselves now with a lot of these types of videos, and it's a very scary thing because once people are afraid to speak out and they embrace the lie, then they are they're set up to do anything to maintain the lie so that they can protect their own security and safety.
exactly. And people put pressure on, like,
Yeah.
oh, come on, man, lighten up. It's just a joke. Just laugh. Oh, and then I'm supposed to react like, oh, okay, I'll just go along with it.
Well, you
Uh,
even see it today with, how many genders are there? Like we're going
right.
to wax political for a moment, but how many genders are there? For all of human history, if you would have said there were multiple genders or that sex is assigned at birth rather than just recognized, like you would be laughed at. But now, so many people in polite company are afraid to actually say what they really think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, there are very subtle and not so subtle ways that we can be manipulated and controlled, to answer your initial question. And um, a lot of it, we just go along with. We just go along with it, and we know it, and it's it's scary to me. It's really scary. People think it's petty, but I don't think it is, because I think this is going, as crazy as it sounds. I think it affects the path of our humanity. I really
Well, and
do.
I
And
think too that by the time you realize it's not petty to cave into these things, it's way too
yeah,
late. So
absolutely.
at what point, like people really need to sit down and say, at what point do I need to draw the line
Yeah.
and stand up and accept whatever consequences come in order to stand for the truth and not become a lie myself.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you wanted to say on that before we move on to where we
No,
want to
not
go?
unless you questions or clarifications, but yeah, no.
Okay, good. So we discussed, we've obviously discussed some of the things that we're wary of, some of our concerns. We've also discussed in the last episode some of the real positives that can come from AI, a number of things. And that's what makes AI so attractive because there's a lot of aspects of it that can be a time saver, that can really help us do our jobs better. That can do them a lot cheaper, and certainly corporations are going to really look at that very, very intently. Like, look, I can increase my production fourfold and only use like, a tenth of the budget or whatever those numbers might be. And so that's going to be really compelling and a real temptation to
Yeah,
corporations
in
and
fact,
individuals.
I just got a quote from Mark Cuban today where he was saying, you have to, if you run a business, do not even rely on your IT people to tell you about artificial intelligence.
Yeah,
He's like, you need to research this, and you need to be on top of it. And if you don't, you will not exist as a company.
yeah,
And he's saying that across the board to
right.
everybody.
And so just to remain competitive, you're going to have to embrace
Gonna have,
it. Um, and that is going to create a lot of ethical questions, and people are going to have to be really clear. Like, is my company surviving worth at some point giving my soul? you know, uh, and that those are pretty stark terms, and it may not be that initially, but you've got to think in those terms. In some way, like, what is this worth to me? Is it what is the trade-off that I'm making, and is it worth it to my family? Is it worth it to my soul? Is it worth it to the society?
and
Um,
these words that we're speaking here, they sound so um, simple and maybe obvious, and kind of, it almost sounds like a solution. Okay, we need to do this, but really think about what's happening. You have just in the last, I'm going to say 6 months, a super surge of AI getting out there.
Yeah.
And this is just the beginning. It's about to it's about to multiply incredibly. And while the AI is and we'll get into this in a minute, like how it could be an issue really, and the need to control it now. Um, while that's going on, you also have all these businesses running, scrambling
Right.
to stay ahead. All at the same time this is happening, and there's going to be a lot of tripping up in the process, and it's not easy. So, I mean, imagine having to actually sit down as a CEO and think, what are the ethical implications of using AI? To what degree should I use it?
Hmm.
But now my my competition is using it to this degree,
Hmm.
but that's beyond my ethics. Do I do that? Do I not do
Hmm.
that?
Right.
These are the kind of questions that we're all going to be facing right now, like
Yeah.
really, really soon,
Yeah.
as the AI is getting smarter to the point where we're trying to keep it down to our level so it's not making these decisions for us. All this is
Right.
happening at once.
Yeah. 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 No doubt about that. So, all these good things that AI can potentially do. So there are obviously threats. Like what are the threats that we might face with AI? You hear a lot about transhumanism and like what are some of these things that very potentially will come down the pike if we don't uh rein it in very deliberately and seriously and step forward with with our eyes open.
Yeah. So let me kind of break it down into steps a little bit here. I'm looking at my notes because I have a lot of them here. I don't want to miss too much here. But so in the short term, we've really covered a lot about that. So I'm not going to go heavily into the short term. When I say actually what I mean, but I should say the now, the right now. What's going to happen now? What's starting to happen now? First of all, is jobs. Jobs are going to be affected. Jobs are dropping off like flies already, and
Mhm.
that's going to continue, and it's going to ramp up. So that's a current threat.
Yeah.
And let me be clear. When I say all this, it's not to it is in a way it sounds doom and gloom, but the point of it is we need to band together and stop this. We need to put a stop right now. We can't it, people are talking about slowing it down. Slowing it down isn't enough. We have to stop it. Because if we don't, again, this stuff is happening like as we speak. Like we had our last uh, video, and then between 3 days
Mhm.
later, all this stuff came out. Like this is how rapidly it's happening. So I don't know how they could possibly stop it, but m- my suggestion is stop it now and let's resolve these things. But you have to do this worldwide, so I don't even
Yeah.
know how you really do that. So if it sounds alarmist,
And the
it's
mechanism to do
yeah,
it worldwide has its own pitfalls.
absolutely.
You have like the globalists and the World Economic Forum and all these global entities that are trying to become the the global power brokers, so that they can control these things on a global level. But it's like, okay, do we want to hand that off to them and then give them the power to actually be able to affect a solution or a change or a stopping on this, and then you know we go from the frying pan into the fire. Then it's like suddenly we've lost our personal autonomy, our national autonomy. We're we're at the beck and call or at the mercy of bureaucrats all over the world, or to these business people that were not elected. Okay, so the next topic I'd like us to tackle, we've talked about a lot of the good things, as I mentioned. But what are some of the threats that are coming down the pike? Some of the threats that have, we went over a lot of the threats that are looming here in the immediate, in the now and in the immediate future. What are
Sure,
some of the short term, maybe a year or two, 4 years, and then what are some of the longer term threats that you see on the horizon that we really need to be concerned about?
sure, yeah. And so as you mentioned, like we've mentioned some of the ones now, and to be clear, like a lot of these threats will overlap. So the ones that are a problem now will continue to be a problem. And So I can kind of estimate like time-wise how these threats will go. As we talked about, like right now, the threat of jobs is here. Jobs are dropping off, and they will continue to drop off kind of exponentially. So that's something to be aware of as an employer, as an employee, as somebody who's looking to get an education. You need to be very well aware of that, and we can talk about that at the end, maybe when we're talking about what to do about how to live our lives, essentially. Another thing is persuasion, politics, things like that. It's We mentioned this, and I'll just quickly say it again, that right now you have to be careful that people and their computer AI systems are trying to manipulate you and your political beliefs. That's happening, and that will continue to happen, and that will ramp up. Another thing is like deception. Again, we mentioned this. This is the here and now. A lot of what you see online is fake, and it will ramp up exponentially. This People are intentionally ramping this up, where a lot of the stuff you see is fake, and including the people that you'll think you're listening to a person actually talking. It'll look as human as we do, which is and
Yeah.
yeah, questionable there. But it will look real. It will look incredibly real, sound real, and it will all be artificially generated with the intention of manipulating us. Okay, so that is definitely here, and will ramp up, and will get better and better at an incredible rate. So that's now. That's right now. In the short term, and so I'm going to say in the next 2 years, I'll call that short term. Again, we talked about physicality. So AI is going to have a physicality to it, and that means a couple different things. One, it means they're going to put it in like a robot form, and we just saw this last week that they're starting to release that, or really demonstrate like, hey, look, we can really do this. And it also means electronically, the AI will have the ability to reach out, like maybe make phone calls or reach out in the real world. It can maybe get bank accounts, or uh, sign up for things, schedule appointments. Imagine the kind of chaos, if you got really creative, that you could do with that. So these kind of abilities are coming very shortly. Some of them kind of exist now, but they're coming even more so in the next 2 years or so. So these are things that we need to look for. Medium term, which will say 2 to 10 years. So this is where we're going from AGI, or approaching AGI, and there'll be some overlap into the super artificial intelligence, which again could theoretically be millions, billions, or even trillions more intelligent than us. It can be incredibly more intelligent. We can't even fathom it. So now we're getting into some really interesting things, some really important threats. Now, I do want to say too, in the short term, like this is kind of obvious, but you have the military type threats, right? So a military can apply AI to drones or what have you. We've probably all seen that on Discovery Channel or in some way. Yeah, that's kind of here, but that's really going to ramp up as well. And then in the 2 to 10 years, that technology will become even more advanced, and we're basically going to be building super soldiers that are incredible. And the minds, the imagination is the limit there. So, imagine something that can fire exactly precisely. It factors everything. It's the most perfect sniper in history. Super fast, super agile. Maybe could swim. Maybe can fly. It could do all those things. An incredible super soldier. If you can picture it, it can be done. A lot of the technologies I just mentioned are already here. They just have to kind of assemble it and make it happen and fine tune it and make it better. And believe me, there are some very aggressive systems in place now that are making it so that they will get very efficient very quickly. One of the companies that's doing that is NVIDIA. You might have heard of them from video cards. NVIDIA is now their stocks were going crazy and they might have crashed, but they're pretty much one of the main leaders in all of this. And NVIDIA has created some simulators. One is they've created a simulator called Eureka, which instead of having, have you ever seen the robots that do like the parkour,
Yeah.
jumping around? Okay, so the way they generally test that is they suit them up. They say, "Okay, go," and then it falls down, and then they fix it, and they go back. Okay, let's correct that, and they run it thousands of times. With Eureka, they can input all this into the computer and run like a million simulations at once, and it's all simulated, and it self corrects on the fly, and it picks the best one, and then it fix that. So within minutes or seconds, it can run months worth of simulations all like that.
Wow.
That's the technology that exists today called Eureka by NVIDIA. I encourage you to look it up and watch the videos or something. But so that super soldier type technology is coming quickly, or at least the ability to do it. So then another one is ethics. And again, we talked about this, but especially with a super intelligence, the ability of the super intelligent AI to create its own ethics. It'll consider everything it knows, which is basically by that time it will be all of human history's knowledge. And depending on how we program it, will determine if it wants an ethical system, what one would look like, what controls to put, what controls to take off. In theory, it could undo anything that we've done as far as ethics, create its own ethics. So we have to. So who knows what that'll look like? We're creating a life that could potentially come up with its own good and ways to live, and hopefully it will be good and nice to us. Then so one thing that's interesting that to maybe help think about this too, and I'm putting it in here in the medium term possible dangers. It's not, this isn't really a danger, but this is a way to think about it. And what's going to happen in this medium term 2 to 10 year time frame is, it's kind of like, I just want to give an analogy to help visualize it. It would be kind of like taking 25th, 26th century technology and putting it into today. Mm-hmm. Now, technically, it's today's technology, right? But normally with technology, it kind of ramps up, right? And we have some playtime. But this will be like nothing we've experienced before. It would be like somebody came from the future and said, here's some technology that is just hundreds of years in the future. Now here you go. And people start playing with it immediately. That's kind of what it'll probably feel like. Okay. So it's kind of scary to think about that. And I just wanted to paint that picture, because in that 2 to 10 year time frame, that's when it's going to feel like we're in the future. What we envisioned in the 70s and the 80s when we were kids, like what's the future going to be, the robots. I think we're heading there, right there in that time frame, that 2 to 10 year time frame, almost the Jetsons kind of situation. Yeah. Right. Another thing in that time frame is that so because we have the super intelligence, it will be able to create new technologies. So for example, AI very likely might be able to solve the nuclear fission issue. So we have all this AI stuff going on. Now, all of a sudden we have nuclear fission. And, that's kind of like the Iron Man thing. Like I have unlimited power. So right. What are we going to do with that? Now we have nuclear fission. We can use that with our AI systems, which can grow because they have unlimited energy and everything else that we need to do. Power cars, power, I assume it's going to help with flying automobiles and all that kind of stuff. So power homes. So how are we going to manage that? How are we going to manage a complete infrastructure change worldwide at the same time that all this other stuff is happening? And that's just nuclear fission. I'm assuming it could find some other game changing technologies aside from the obvious, like the health industry.
Mm.
And that gets into like transhumanism, and so
Why don't you define transhumanism for us?
sure.
We got about
Transhuman.
10 minutes.
I'm gonna come up with a definition off the top of my head. This isn't a perfect definition, but
Mhm.
essentially, it's um, the ability or the drive to improve who we are as humans through uh, essentially like upgrades to us. Okay, so like so for example, the Neuralink chip is an upgrade to us, right? Or we can an industry that's coming from this, which it's called biohacking or digital biology. This will probably be, if you still think you want to play the stock market, look into digital biology or biohacking. This will probably be the biggest industry in human history, and we're going to be tackling our biological problems like cancer and colds and memory problems and all these kind of things, instead of using biology type solutions, they'll be more like akin to digital solutions. So for example, printing um, um, DNA or things like that. So and being able to just go in and correct our DNA if something's wrong or something. So we'll be able to go in and make corrections, and it'll all be very very almost like you're fixing a computer program versus a human.
Yeah.
So you're going to see that cross, and then imagine like we have the Neuralink technology. The Neuralink technology is almost a certainty. In fact, it's already being worked on, and the bugs are getting worked out. The big problem we have right now is bandwidth. So right now, when you ask your home computer assistant, what's the weather, it will pause and say the temperature outside is 72 degrees. That's kind of how it'll be in our brain right now. Like, what's the capital of Mississippi? And then you'll be able to say it. But so there's a bandwidth problem. Once we solve that bandwidth problem where it's going from the brain to the chip or from the chip to the brain, we won't even notice it. It'll be seamless. So that's where we're like kind of in cyborg territory. Somebody
Well,
asked
that,
me, yeah, go ahead.
that kind of brings up, will then human beings be able to be hacked?
Okay. Yeah. So I would say we are already being hacked, even without those chips. You probably mean more in a literal computer way.
Yeah.
In a way, hacking is sort of brainwashing and taking information and replacing it with the information that you want. And so in a way that's being done now, absolutely it can be done when we go digital. Now, I don't think I doubt. I mean, who knows? I don't know, but it depends on how things are designed. But in theory, yeah, we could be hacked, but hopefully they design the chips in such a way that that's not going to happen. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
and even if they did, like super intelligence will come along and figure out a way to hack it and undo all that. So yeah,
Right.
that's a good question. Somebody asked me today, a friend that was over here at the house. He's like, well, will intelligence be able to what do you say, like hallucinate? Now we use the word hallucinate like because it does now. We call it hallucinating when it adds stuff to the images, and so it has six fingers, and it does that to the data too and things. But he meant like from a spiritual level, like will AI get to the point where it can like and it will get spiritual and maybe start believing in God, or those kind of things, or if it did mushrooms, would it affect it, those kind of things. And these are questions that we don't know the answer to, but um, I think in a way it could, because there's going to be so much crossover between the biology and the digital worlds, that there that at least the biology will still have that capability, and then the digital will be part of processing that information.
Mhm.
So I believe in a way it would.
Okay, well, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I think we're going to not start a new topic. But is there anything else that you'd like to convey regarding some of the threats, midterm, long term? Anything else along these lines that you'd like to talk to us
just
about?
just real briefly, and this is almost a review as well, but I went up to 10 years. What about beyond 10 years? Obviously, a lot of that's unknown. It's going to depend on how we handle things today. Um, but it could lead to essentially human insignificance. Humans can become insignificant in the world, or we could be eliminated. It just depends on the morality of the superintelligence, depends on safeguards that we put in place, and our ability to maintain those safeguards. Um, and the Neuralink stuff will become more and more prevalent. This is, a lot of it now. It's going to be just testing phases. People that have diseases that this is the best option for them, for their comfort, for their life here. But eventually, it's going to get to the point where I'm exaggerating, but you can go to Best Buy and upgrade, and now you're a cyborg, or what, however we decide to do that. Most likely be like taking a pill or something like that.
Right.
So that's coming. I don't know how soon after 10 years, but it's hard to imagine that wouldn't happen in the next 50 years, I'd say. So yeah. So that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I think we'll wrap up there. So just to kind
Yeah.
of give a preview for what we want to do in the next session, which I think will be our last one. I'm not sure.
It's the one
Um,
I'm excited about because it gives the solution. It gives the solutions to all this and tells us what we can do about all this. So I'm kind of excited about it. I feel like a Debbie Downer with the first several sessions here, but the last one's the best. It tells us, how we can think and do it. But I'm sorry, go ahead. But
no,
yeah,
well,
excited
yeah,
about
that go ahead
yeah,
and sort
yeah,
of give a preview of that. Like, what can we do? Is it too late? How do we stop it? Can we stop it? How do we live in that kind of a world?
yeah,
What do we teach our kids? How do we make those ethical decisions early enough to be able to manage this in our own lives, whatever the technology is doing? So, all
yeah.
right, Rick. Well, thank you, and we'll
Here,
pick this up in the next session then.
all right. Appreciate it, man. Thanks.